In the quiet Willoughby Inn, nestled in the misty hills of St. Mary's Hollow, a scream pierces the night. Major Forsyth lies dead, a dagger in his heart. Secrets from his past spilling with his blood. Who among the guests, elegant Miss Vance, nervous Mr. Carver, or watchful Miss Henshaw, hides a deadly truth? Why was a candlestick moved? And what does a cryptic letter reveal? Join Hercule Poirot as he unravels lies, betrayals, and a shocking murder in a place where no one is what they seem. Will the truth emerge before the killer strikes again? Chapter 1. The Quiet of the Willoughby Inn. The Willoughby Inn stood at the edge of the village of St. Mary's Hollow, a quaint establishment of weathered stone and ivy-clad walls, nestled against the rolling hills of the English countryside. To the casual observer, it was a picture of serene gentility, the sort of place where one might expect to find elderly widows sipping tea or retired colonels recounting tales of distant campaigns. Yet, beneath its polished oak beams and the soft clink of porcelain in the dining room, there simmered a quiet tension, like the faint hum of a tuning fork struck just out of earshot. It was a crisp October evening in 1935, and the inn's parlor glowed with the amber light of a fire. The air carried the faint scent of wood smoke and lavender polish, and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner marked the passage of time with solemn regularity. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal companion of Hercule Poirot, sat in a high-backed chair, his hands folded over a copy of The Times that he had not read in full. His eyes, however, were not on the newsprint, but on the small assembly of guests gathered in the room, each absorbed in their own private worlds, yet bound by the curious intimacy of a shared space. Hastings had arrived at the Willoughby Inn at Poirot's insistence, though the purpose of their visit remained as yet unclear. Poirot had been cryptic, as was his wont, mentioning only that he had received a letter from an old acquaintance, a certain Mrs. Beatrice Langley, who owned the inn. The letter, Poirot had said, hinted at a matter of some delicacy, though he had refused to elaborate further, promising only that all would become clear in time. Hastings, accustomed to his friend's theatrical reticence, had packed his suitcase and followed without protest, though he could not shake a faint unease. The parlor was populated by a curious assortment of guests.
Reginald Forsyth, a retired military man with a ruddy complexion and a penchant for brandy. His booming laugh had filled the dining room at luncheon, but now he sat in silence, his eyes fixed on the flames as though they held some secret. Hastings wondered what had subdued him so suddenly. Perhaps the letter he had received at breakfast, which he had stuffed into his pocket with a scowl. At a card table, two younger guests were engaged in a game of bridge, though their play seemed desultory. Miss Eleanor Vance, a strikingly beautiful woman in her late 20s, shuffled the cards with an air of boredom. Her auburn hair caught the firelight, and her green eyes flicked occasionally toward the door, as though expecting someone. Her partner, Mr. Julian Carver, a solicitor from London with sharp features and a nervous manner, seemed ill at ease. Hastings had overheard him earlier, muttering about a disgraceful oversight in some legal matter, though he had clammed up when pressed for details. The fifth guest, Dr. Lawrence Perry, sat alone in a corner, engrossed in a medical journal. A wiry man in his 40s, with spectacles perched precariously on his nose, He had the distracted air of someone whose mind was elsewhere. Hastings recalled that Dr. Perry had arrived unexpectedly that morning, claiming a need for a quiet retreat to complete some research. Yet his frequent glances at Mrs. Langley suggested a more personal interest. The final member of the party was Miss Clara Henshaw, a spinster of indeterminate age who occupied a rocking chair near the hearth. Her knitting needles clicked rhythmically, and her small, bird-like eyes darted about the room, missing nothing. Hastings found her presence oddly disquieting. She seemed to observe everything with a quiet intensity, as though cataloguing the faults and frailties of those around her. The door to the parlour swung open, and a young maid, Ellen, entered with a tray of tea things. She moved with the practiced grace of one accustomed to service, but Hastings noted the slight flush in her cheeks and the way her hands trembled as she set the tray down. "Tea, ma'am?" she asked Mrs. Langley, who nodded absently, her pen still scratching across the paper. "Thank you, Ellen," Mrs. Langley said, her voice soft but strained. "Do ensure the fire is kept up. It's grown chilly tonight." Ellen bobbed a curtsy and retreated, but not before Hastings caught her exchanging a fleeting glance with Julian Carver. The solicitor's face reddened, and he fumbled a card, earning a sharp look from Miss Vance. "Really, Mr. Carver," she said, her tone teasing but with an edge, "you must pay attention. One would think you had other matters on your mind." Carver muttered an apology, and the game resumed, though the atmosphere in the room grew heavier. Hastings shifted in his seat, wishing Poirot would arrange his thoughts, but Hastings knew better than to disturb him. Poirot's methods were as precise as the ticking of the grandfather clock, and he would emerge when ready. As if summoned by the thought, the door opened again, and Hercule Poirot stepped into the parlor. He was, as ever, immaculate. His patent leather shoes gleamed, his mustaches were waxed to perfection, and his green eyes sparkled with quiet amusement. The room seemed to pause, as though his presence demanded attention. "Bonsoir, mes amis," Poirot said, his voice smooth and accented with the faintest trace of his Belgian heritage. "I trust you are all enjoying the hospitality of the charming Willoughby Inn." Mrs. Langley looked up from her writing, a flicker of relief crossing her face. "Monsieur Poirot, I'm so glad you've joined us. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten us." "Forgotten? No, no, madame," Poirot said, bowing slightly. "Hercule Poirot forgets nothing. I have merely been reflecting." He moved to the center of the room, his small, neat figure commanding the space with an effortless authority. Hastings watched as the other guests reacted. Major Forsyth's scowl deepened, Miss Vance's lips curved into a faint smile, and Dr. Perry adjusted his spectacles nervously. Miss Henshaw's knitting needles paused, and her eyes narrowed. "Reflection," Poirot continued, "is most necessary in a place such as this, where all is not as it seems. Is it not so, Captain Hastings?" Hastings started, caught off guard. Quite, Poirot," he said, hoping his friend would elaborate. But Poirot merely smiled and took a seat near the fire, his hands folded neatly in his lap. The conversation resumed, though it was stilted now, as though Poirot's presence had cast a shadow over the room. Hastings watched as Mrs. Langley sealed her letter and handed it to Ellen, who had returned to clear the tea tray. The maid's hands shook as she took the envelope, and Hastings made a mental note to mention it to Poirot later. As the evening wore on, the guests began to disperse. Major Forsyth excused himself to stretch his legs, though Hastings suspected he was heading for the bar. Miss Vance and Mr. Carver abandoned their card game, and Dr. Perry retired to his room, citing a headache. Miss Henshaw remained, her knitting needles clicking like the ticking of a clock, counting down to some unseen event. Poirot leaned toward Hastings, his voice low. Mon ami, you have observed the guests, yes? What do you make of them? Hastings frowned, considering. They're an odd lot, Poirot. Mrs. Langley seems worried, and that maid, Ellen, is jumpy. Carver's hiding something, and Miss Vance, well, she's got a sharp tongue. The others, I'm not sure yet. Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming.
Work. Before Hastings could press for more, a piercing scream shattered the quiet. It came from upstairs, sharp and raw, followed by the sound of something heavy falling. The parlor froze, all eyes turning toward the ceiling. Poirot was on his feet in an instant, his calm demeanor unshaken. "Come, Hastings," he said, striding towards the door. "It begins." Chapter 2. The Shadow of Death. The scream still echoed in the air as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings hurried up the narrow staircase of the Willoughby Inn, the polished wood creaking beneath their steps. The other guests followed in a disordered rush, their faces a mixture of curiosity and dread. The grandfather clock in the parlor below struck 9, its chimes an incongruous counterpoint to the chaos unfolding above. The source of the scream was soon apparent. At the end of the first-floor corridor, outside a door marked Room 7, stood Ellen, the young maid, her hands pressed to her mouth and her eyes wide with terror. At her feet lay the crumpled form of Major Reginald Forsyth, his ruddy face now deathly pale, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. A dark stain spread across the front of his waistcoat, and a small, ornate dagger protruded from his chest, its handle gleaming in the dim light of the corridor. Poirot knelt beside the body, his movements precise and unhurried. He examined the dagger without touching it, his lips pursed in thought. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "A most theatrical method of dispatch. The blade, it is not common, non?" Hastings, standing a step behind, felt a familiar queasiness at the sight of death. "Good Lord, Poirot," he said, his voice low. "Stabbed right here in the inn. Who could have done this?" Poirot's green eyes flicked upward, meeting Hastings' gaze. "Patience, mon ami. The question is not only who, but when and why. Observe, if you please, the position of the body. He lies as though he fell backward, yes, and yet the dagger, it is angled upward, suggesting a strike from below." Hastings frowned, trying to follow Poirot's reasoning. But the scene was too chaotic for clear thought. Mrs. Langley had arrived, her face ashen as she clutched the banister for support. "Oh, Major Forsyth," she gasped. "What has happened? Ellen, what did you see?" The maid shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. I was bringing fresh linens, ma'am. I came up the stairs and there he was, just lying there. I didn't see anyone, I swear." Miss Clara Henshaw, who had joined the group with surprising speed for a woman of her age, clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Such a dreadful thing," she said, her knitting needle still clutched in one hand. "In a respectable establishment like this." "Places. But rest assured, Hercule Poirot is here, and the truth, it will be uncovered." Dr. Lawrence Perry pushed through the crowd, his medical journal abandoned somewhere downstairs. "Let me through," he said, his voice sharp. "I'm a doctor." He knelt beside the body, checking for a pulse, though the gesture seemed futile given the dagger's grim presence. After a moment, he shook his head. "He's gone. Dead for perhaps 10 minutes, no more. The wound is fresh." Poirot's eyes narrowed. 10 minutes, you say, doctor? Most precise. And how do you determine this?" Dr. Perry adjusted his spectacles, clearly unnerved by Poirot's scrutiny. "The blood, it's still wet, and the body is warm. Rigor has not yet set in. It's a simple medical observation." "Simple, yet most useful," Poirot said, his tone unreadable. He turned to the assembled guests,
who had now gathered in a tight semicircle around the body. Miss Eleanor Vance stood slightly apart, her arms crossed, her face a mask of composed shock. Julian Carver, the solicitor, hovered near her, his hands fidgeting with his tie as though it were strangling him. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the murmurs, "a crime has been committed, and it is imperative that we act with order and method. No one is to leave this inn until the police have been summoned and the scene examined. Captain Hastings, if you would be so kind as to telephone the local constabulary." Hastings nodded, grateful for a task to distract him from the grim tableau. As he hurried downstairs to the inn's small office, he heard Poirot's voice continue, calm and commanding. "And you, Madame Langley, perhaps you can tell me if Major Forsyth had any enemies, or if anything unusual occurred this evening." Mrs. Langley's voice trembled as she replied, "Enemies? No, I can't imagine. He was a regular guest, always so jovial, though he did seem out of sorts today. That letter he received at breakfast upset him terribly." Poirot's interest sharpened, though his expression remained impassive. "A letter, you say? Most interesting. And where is this letter now?" "I don't know," Mrs. Langley said, wringing her hands. "He put it in his pocket, I think." Poirot turns back to the body, his gaze lingering on the Major's jacket. With a handkerchief, he carefully reached into the pocket and withdrew a crumpled envelope. It was unsealed, and inside was a single sheet of paper. Poirot unfolded it, his eyes scanning the contents with rapid intensity. He did not share what he read, but Hastings, returning from his errand, caught the faintest quirk of Poirot's moustache, a sign that something significant had been discovered.
It into his own pocket. Inspector Japp is a man of good sense, though he lacks the finesse of Hercule Poirot. Now, let us preserve the scene. No one is to touch the body or this corridor until the police arrive. Miss Vance spoke for the first time, her voice cool and measured. "Surely, Monsieur Poirot, you don't suspect one of us? This could have been an outsider, a thief, perhaps, or a vagrant." Poirot's smile was polite but unyielding. "A possibility, mademoiselle, but unlikely. The Willoughby Inn is isolated, and the doors were locked this evening, were they not, Madame Langley?" Mrs. Langley nodded, her face pale. "Yes, I always lock the front and back doors after dinner. It's a habit." "Then," Poirot said, "we are dealing with someone within these walls, and that, mes amis, is where we shall begin." The guests exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of Poirot's words settling over them like a fog. Miss Henshaw's knitting needles resumed their clicking, a steady rhythm that seemed to mock the tension. Dr. Perry cleared his throat, as though about to speak, but thought better of it. Carver's fidgeting grew more pronounced, and Ellen, still trembling, slipped away to the servants' quarters, her absence noted by Poirot's watchful eyes. As the group dispersed to await the police, Poirot drew Hastings aside. "What do you make of it, mon ami?" he asked, his voice low. Hastings shook his head. "A ghastly business, Poirot. The Major seemed a decent sort, but that dagger, it's so deliberate. And that letter, do you think it's connected?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Everything, Hastings, is connected. The letter, the dagger, the scream of the maid, they are pieces of a puzzle. But the picture, it is not yet clear. We must observe and we must think. The little grey cells, they are already at work." The sound of a car engine rumbled outside, signalling the arrival of Inspector Japp. Hastings felt a flicker of relief, but Poirot's expression remained one of quiet determination. As they descended to meet the inspector, the inn seemed to close in around them, its walls holding secrets that only Poirot's methodical mind could unravel. Chapter 3. The Arrival of Order.
The Willoughby Inn's parlour, so serene mere hours ago, now bore the weight of tragedy as Inspector Japp strode in, his overcoat damp from the autumn drizzle. His familiar bulldog-like face was set in a grim expression, though his eyes brightened at the sight of Hercule Poirot. Captain Hastings, standing near the fireplace, felt a surge of relief. Japp's no-nonsense approach was a comforting contrast to the inn's oppressive atmosphere. "Well, well, Poirot," Japp said, shaking rain from his hat. "Fancy finding you here. Trouble seems to follow you like a shadow."
Is called Where Trouble Has Already Made Its Home. And here it seems, we have trouble most grave.
Japp grunted, turning to Hastings.
"Evening, Captain. Care to fill me in, or shall we let the great detective spin his tale?"
Hastings, ever eager to be useful, recounted the evening's events: the scream, the discovery of Major Forsyth's body, the dagger, and the gathered guests. Japp listened, scribbling notes in a battered notebook.
His brow furrowing as Hastings mentioned the letter Poirot had found.
"That letter, Poirot," Japp said, turning to the detective.
"Let's have a look, then."
Poirot produced the crumpled envelope with a flourish, handing it to Japp with the air of a conjurer revealing a card. "It was in the Major's pocket," he said. "The contents, they are illuminating." Japp unfolded the letter, his lips moving silently as he read. Hastings, peering over his shoulder, caught fragments of the text. "You cannot hide forever. Debts must be paid. Meet me tonight." The signature was a scrawl, barely legible, but Japp's eyes narrowed.
"Sounds like blackmail."
Japp said, folding the letter and slipping it into an evidence bag.
"Any idea who wrote it?"
Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Not yet, Inspector. But the letter, it is a thread in the tapestry. We shall follow it, and others, to the truth." Japp nodded, then turned to the assembled guests, who had been summoned back to the parlor. Mrs. Beatrice Langley stood by the window, her hands clasped tightly. Miss Eleanor Vance sat with poised elegance, though her eyes were wary. Julian Carver, the solicitor, fidgeted with his cufflinks, while Dr. Lawrence Perry adjusted his spectacles repeatedly. Miss Clara Henshaw, knitting abandon for once, sat with her hands folded, her sharp eyes darting between faces. Ellen, the maid, hovered near the door, her face pale and tear-streaked.
"Right then."
Japp began, his voice authoritative.
"Major Forsyth was murdered between 8:45 and 9 p.m. according to Dr. Perry's estimate. I'll need statements from each of you, where you were, what you saw, what you heard, and don't leave out anything, no matter how small."
Poirot, standing slightly apart, observed the group with the intensity of a hawk. Hastings knew that look. It was the look of a man cataloging every gesture, every inflection, every flicker of guilt or fear. Poirot's little gray cells were in full motion, and Hastings felt a familiar mix of awe and frustration at his friend's impenetrable process. Mrs. Langley spoke first, her voice steady despite her evident strain. "I was in the parlor writing a letter until I heard Ellen scream. I didn't see Major Forsyth after dinner when he said he was going for a walk." Japp scribbled this down.
"And what time was dinner over?"
"About 8 p.m., Mrs. Langley replied. "We all lingered a bit, but the Major left the dining room first."
Vance was next, her tone cool and precise. "I was playing bridge with Mr. Carver in the parlor from 8:15 until the scream. We didn't leave the room." Carver nodded vigorously, his nervous energy palpable. "That's right. Just bridge. Nothing else." Poirot's eyes lingered on Carver, and Hastings noted the slight tilt of his head, as though catching a false note in a melody. "And you, Monsieur Carver," Poirot said softly. "You saw nothing unusual, no one entering or leaving the parlor." Carver's Adam's apple bobbed. "No, nothing. I was focused on the game." Dr. Perry cleared his throat. "I was in my room, reading. I came down when I heard the scream, around 9 o'clock. I didn't see the Major after dinner." Miss Henshaw's voice was sharp, cutting through the room. "I was in the parlor, knitting, until the scream. I saw the Major leave after dinner, but he didn't say where he was going. He seemed agitated." Poirot turned to Ellen, who flinched under his gaze. "And you, mademoiselle? You found the body? What were you doing before?" Ellen twisted her apron in her hands.
I was in the kitchen, clearing up after dinner, sir. Then I went to fetch linens from the upstairs closet. That's when I found him. Her voice broke, and she looked away. Jap finished his notes, then addressed the group. Nobody leaves the inn until we've got this sorted. My men are searching the grounds, but this looks like an inside job. That dagger didn't walk in on its own. As Jap moved to confer with a constable who had just arrived, Poirot drew Hastings aside. "What do you observe, mon ami?" he asked, his voice low. Hastings frowned, trying to piece together the fragments. "Well, everyone claims to have been in the parlor, or their rooms, but nobody saw the Major after dinner. That letter suggests someone had a grudge against him. And Ellen, she's awfully shaken for just finding the body." Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming. "Bien. You begin to see, Hastings. But consider, the alibis, they are too neat, too convenient. And the dagger. Such a weapon is not chosen by chance. It is personal, intimate. We must learn more about our Major Forsyth." Jap returned, his expression grim. "The constable found something in the garden, a cigarette case engraved with the initials R.F. It was near the back door, half buried in the mud." Mrs. Langley gasped. "That's the Major's. He was always misplacing it." Poirot's interest sharpened. "And the back door. It was locked, you said, madame?" "Yes," Mrs. Langley confirmed. "I checked it myself after dinner." "Then," Poirot said, "the cigarette case suggests the Major was outside."
Hastings watched, knowing this was Poirot at his most formidable, his mind weaving connections where others saw only chaos. "What are you thinking, Poirot?" he ventured. "I am thinking, mon ami, of order and method. The Major was a man of habits, yet tonight he broke them. Why? The letter, the dagger, the cigarette case, they are pieces of a puzzle, but the picture is not yet clear. We must look closer, Hastings. We must look at the hearts of those around us." The search of the rooms yielded little, a few personal effects, nothing overtly incriminating. But Poirot lingered in Major Forsyth's room, examining a small desk where a half-finished letter lay addressed to a Mr. T. The contents were vague, mentioning a matter of urgency and a debt repaid. Poirot tucked this away mentally, saying nothing to Jap. As the night wore on, the guests were allowed to retire, though under strict instructions to remain in their rooms. Poirot and Hastings returned to the parlour, where the fire had burned low. "This is a dark business, Poirot," Hastings said, sinking into a chair. "That letter in the Major's pocket, blackmail, you think?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, his voice thoughtful, "but blackmail is a motive, not a method. The dagger, it speaks of passion, of intimacy, and the cigarette case, why was it outside? We must consider the timeline, Hastings. The Major leaves dinner at 8 o'clock, is seen no more, and is found dead at 9 o'clock. 1 hour, and yet so much has happened." Hastings shook his head. "It's a devil of a puzzle, Poirot. Oui, but puzzles they are made to be solved. And Hercule Poirot, he does not fail." His eyes gleamed with quiet confidence, and Hastings felt a flicker of hope amidst the darkness. Chapter 4. The Questions Begin. The morning after Major Forsyth's murder dawned grey and heavy, the mist clinging to the hills around the Willoughby Inn like a shroud. Inside, the parlour had been transformed into an impromptu interview room, its genteel furnishings now overshadowed by the grim purpose of Inspector Jap's investigation. Hercule Poirot sat in a high-backed chair near the window, his posture impeccable, his green eyes scanning the room with the precision of a watchmaker. Captain Hastings, seated nearby with a notebook, felt the weight of the previous night's events pressing upon him, though Poirot's calm presence was, as ever, a steadying force. Inspector Jap, his notebook open and pencil poised, had decided to conduct formal interviews with each guest and staff member with Poirot's assistance. "We'll get to the bottom of this, Poirot," Jap said, his voice gruff but determined. Someone in this inn knows more than they're letting on. Indeed, Inspector, Poirot replied, his tone smooth as polished oak. But it is not enough to ask what they know. We must observe how they answer, what they conceal, and what they reveal without knowing. The human heart, it speaks in silences as much as in words. Hastings suppressed a smile. Poirot's penchant for the philosophical never failed to amuse him, even in such dire circumstances. The first to be interviewed was Mrs. Beatrice Langley, the inn's proprietress, who entered the parlour with the air of one steeling herself for an ordeal. Her silver hair was neatly pinned, but her eyes betrayed a sleepless night. "Miss Langley," Japp began, "you said last night that Major Forsyth was a regular guest. How well did you know him?" Mrs. Langley clasped her hands, her fingers twisting slightly. "Quite well, Inspector. He's been coming to the Willoughby for years, ever since my late husband and I took over the inn. He was a charming man, fond of his brandy and his stories. But he kept to himself about personal matters." Poirot leaned forward, his voice gentle but probing. "And yet, Madame, you noticed he was upset by a letter yesterday morning. Did he ever speak of debts or enemies or perhaps a past that troubled him?" Mrs. Langley hesitated, her gaze flickering to the window. "Not directly, Monsieur Poirot, but he did mention once, some months ago, that he had made mistakes in his youth. Debts of honour, he called them. I didn't press him, it wasn't my place." Japp scribbled this down, while Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And this letter, Madame, did you see who delivered it?" "No," she said quickly. "It came with the morning post. Ellen brought it to him at breakfast." Poirot made a mental note, his fingers tapping lightly on the arm of his chair. "Merci, Madame. One more thing, the dagger used in the crime. It is most distinctive. Have you seen such a weapon before?" Mrs. Langley's face paled. "I believe it's one of the decorative pieces from the dining room. There's a display of old weapons above the fireplace, swords, daggers, that sort of thing. I hadn't noticed it missing until now." Japp exchanged a glance with Poirot, who nodded slightly. "Very well, Mrs. Langley," Japp said. "That'll be all for now. Send in Miss Vance, please." As Mrs. Langley left, Hastings whispered to Poirot, "That dagger being from the inn, it narrows things down, doesn't it? Only someone here could have taken it." "Précisément, Hastings," Poirot murmured, "but the question is when and why choose such a weapon? It is not subtle, no? It speaks of intent, of symbolism." Miss Eleanor Vance entered next, her auburn hair catching the dull morning light. She sat with an air of studied composure, her green eyes meeting Japp's with a hint of defiance. "I don't see why I must be questioned," she said, her voice crisp. "I was playing bridge with Mr. Carver all evening, as I told you." Japp nodded, unfazed. "So you did, Miss Vance. But let's go over it again. You and Carver were in the parlour from 8:15 until "Dinner?" "No," she said firmly. "He left the dining room before us, and I didn't see him again until he was found." Poirot's voice was soft, almost soothing. "Mademoiselle, you are a woman of keen observation, I think. Did you notice anything unusual about the Major during dinner? A look, a word, perhaps a gesture?" Miss Vance's lips tightened, but she answered readily. "He was quieter than usual. Normally he'd regale us with stories of India, but last night he barely spoke. He kept glancing at his watch, as if he were waiting for something." "Most interesting," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "And you, mademoiselle, you have known the Major long." Her expression hardened. "Not long. I met him here at the inn a few months ago. He was friendly, but I kept my distance." Japp raised an eyebrow but moved on. "Right, Miss Vance. If you remember anything else, you'll tell us." As she left, Poirot turned to Hastings. "She is guarded, no?" "She tells the truth, but not all of it. We shall see." Julian Carver was next, his nervous energy filling the room before he even spoke. His hands shook as he adjusted his tie, and his eyes darted between Japp and Poirot. "I've told you everything," he said. almost before Japp could ask a question. "I was with Miss Vance playing bridge. I didn't see the Major after dinner." Poirot's smile was disarming. "Monsieur Carver, you are a solicitor, yes? A man of detail. Tell me, did you notice the maid, Ellen, last night? She seemed distressed, perhaps." Carver's face flushed. "Ellen? I barely noticed her. She was serving tea, that's all. I was focused on the game." "Focused, yet distracted," Poirot said, his tone mild. "Your cards, they were not played with great skill, I think. Something weighed on your mind?" Carver bristled. "I don't see what my card game has to do with anything. I didn't kill the Major." Japp intervened, his voice firm. "Nobody's accusing you, Mr. Carver. Just answer the questions." Dr. Lawrence Perry followed, his scholarly air marred by a faint sheen of sweat on his brow. He confirmed his alibi, Reading in his room, and denied any close acquaintance with the Major. But Poirot's question about the dagger elicited a curious response. "It's an unusual piece," Dr. Perry said, adjusting his spectacles. "I noticed it in the dining room a few days ago. Indian, I think, from the hilt design." "You have an eye for such things, Doctor?" Poirot asked. "I dabble in antiquities," Dr. Perry said, his voice hesitant. "It's a hobby." Miss Clara Henshaw was the last guest interviewed, her sharp eyes missing nothing as she settled into the chair. "I've seen many things in my years," she said, her voice crisp. "But murder in an inn like this? It's a disgrace." Poirot's tone was respectful. "See anything last night that struck you as out of place?" Miss Henshaw's lips pursed. "The Major was restless at dinner, checking his watch, and Mr. Carver, he was distracted, dropping cards. As for Ellen, she was in and out of the parlour all evening, always looking over her shoulder." Japp leaned forward. "You saying the maid was acting suspicious?" "I'm saying she was nervous," Miss Henshaw corrected. "As for why, you'd have to ask her." Finally, Ellen was called. Her hands trembled as she stood before Japp, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't see anything, sir. I was in the kitchen, then fetching linens. I swear I didn't know the Major was dead until I found him." Poirot's gaze was gentle but unyielding. "Mademoiselle, you delivered a letter to Major Forsyth yesterday morning. Did you see who sent it?" Ellen shook her head. "No, sir. It was in the post-bag like the others." As she left, Poirot turned to Japp and Hastings. "The alibis, they are consistent, yet they tell us little. The dagger, the letter, the cigarette case, these are the keys. We must learn more about our Major and about those who shared his final hours." Japp sighed. "I'll have my men check the dagger for fingerprints, but I'm betting it's clean." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his eyes distant, "but the truth, it is never clean. It is hidden in the details, and Hercule Poirot will find it." Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The Willoughby Inn seemed to hold its breath as the second day of the investigation unfolded, the mist outside thickening as if to mirror the murkiness within. The parlour, once a haven of quiet civility, now felt like a stage where each guest played a part, their words and actions scrutinised by Hercule Poirot's unrelenting gaze. Captain Hastings, seated near the window with his notebook, watched as Inspector Japp paced, his frustration palpable after a morning of fruitless searches and fingerprint tests that revealed nothing but smudges on the dagger's ornate hilt. "No prints, Poirot," Japp said, tossing his notebook onto the table. "Either the killer wore gloves, or they wiped the thing clean. And that cigarette case in the garden? Nothing but mud and the Major's initials. We're chasing shadows." Poirot, impeccable in his neatly pressed suit, tilted his head, his moustaches twitching. "Shadows, mon cher Japp? No, they are not shadows but reflections, distorted perhaps, but revealing if one knows where to look. The absence of evidence, it is itself a clue." Hastings frowned, jotting down Poirot's words, though he wasn't entirely sure what they meant. You think the lack of fingerprints is deliberate? He asked. Précisément, Poirot replied, his green eyes gleaming. The killer, they are cautious, methodical, but in their caution, they betray themselves.
Good Inspector astray. Japp snorted. Red herrings, eh? I'd say that Solicitor Carver is looking fishy. He's nervous as a cat, and that business with the maid, those glances they exchanged, I'm having him brought in again. As Japp sent a constable to fetch Julian Carver, Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice low. The inspector, he sees the obvious, and that is good. But we, Hastings, must see what lies beneath. Monsieur Carver is nervous, oui, but is it the nervousness of guilt or of something else? Before Hastings could respond, Carver entered, his face pale and his hands fidgeting with his cufflinks. He sat reluctantly, his eyes darting between Japp and Poirot. I've told you everything, he said, his voice tight. I was playing bridge with Miss Vance. I didn't see the Major after dinner. Japp leaned forward, his tone sharp. That's all well and good, Mr. Carver, but you're holding something back. We've got witnesses saying you were distracted, dropping cards, and you've been seen whispering with the maid, Ellen. Care to explain? Carver's flush deepened, and he swallowed hard. Ellen? I barely know her. She's just the maid. As for the cards, I was tired, that's all. It's not a crime to play poorly. Poirot's smile was disarming, almost gentle. No, monsieur, it is not a crime. But it is curious, is it not, that a man of your profession, a solicitor accustomed to precision, should be so distracted on the very night a murder occurs. Perhaps there is a matter, a personal matter, that weighs upon you. Carver's jaw tightened, and for a moment Hastings thought he might bolt from the room. But he shook his head, his voice low. It's nothing, just business troubles. A case in London, some papers misplaced. It's got nothing to do with the Major. Japp raised an eyebrow but made a note. We'll check on that, Carver. Don't leave the inn. As Carver left, his shoulders hunched, Hastings whispered to Poirot. He's hiding something, isn't he? That business about misplaced papers sounded flimsy. Poirot nodded, his fingers steepled. Oui, Hastings. He hides, but whether it is murder or merely shame, we shall see. For now he is the obvious suspect, the red herring, as it were, but there are others. Japp, overhearing, grunted. You're saying Carver's a distraction? Then who's your money on, Poirot? Poirot's eyes twinkled. My money, Inspector, is on the truth, and the truth does not yet show its face. Let us speak with Mademoiselle Ellen. Her fear, it is most illuminating. Ellen was summoned, her apron crumpled and her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She stood before Japp and Poirot, her hands twisting nervously. I didn't do anything, sir. Nervous last night, and you've been spotted talking to Mr. Carver. What's going on? Ellen's eyes widened, and she shook her head vehemently. Talking to Mr. Carver? I only spoke to him about the tea, sir. He asked for more sugar, that's all. Poirot's voice was soft, almost coaxing. Mademoiselle, you are frightened, and not only of the murder, I think. The letter you delivered to Major Forsyth, did you see its contents, perhaps? Or did someone ask you about it? Ellen's hands froze, and for a moment Hastings thought she might faint. No, sir, she whispered. I didn't read it. It was sealed. I just gave it to him, like I was told. And who told you to deliver it? Poirot pressed, his gaze unyielding. The post, sir, Ellen said, her voice barely audible. It was in the post bag, like Mrs. Langley said. Poirot leaned back, his expression unreadable. Merci, mademoiselle. You may go, but remain where we can find you. As Ellen fled the room, Japp sighed. She's scared stiff, but I don't know if it's guilt or just nerves. What do you make of it, Poirot?
Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on the arm of his chair. "She is frightened, yes, but not only of the murder. There is a secret, Inspector, and it binds her to someone in this inn. But whether it is Monsieur Carver or another, we must discover." The interviews continued, with Miss Eleanor Vance and Dr. Lawrence Perry reiterating their alibis, bridge and reading respectively. Miss Clara Henshaw, however, provided a new detail when called back. "I remembered something," she said, her bird-like eyes gleaming. "Last night, just before the scream, I heard footsteps on the back stairs, the ones near the kitchen, quick steps like someone running." Japp's pencil paused. "The back stairs? That's near where the cigarette case was found. Did you see who it was?" "No," Miss Henshaw said, her tone crisp. "I was in the parlour, but the door was open and I heard them clearly. I thought it was Ellen fetching something, but now I'm not so sure." Poirot's interest sharpened. "Most interesting, mademoiselle. And these footsteps, they went up or down?" "Up," she said firmly, "toward the first floor." Japp made a note, then dismissed her. "That's something at least. If someone was on the back stairs just before the murder, it could narrow things down. I'll have the constables check for footprints." Poirot nodded, but his mind seemed elsewhere. "The footsteps, the cigarette case, the letter, they form a pattern, but it is incomplete. We must consider the Major's life, his past. Inspector, have you learned anything of his history?" Japp shrugged. "Not much yet. He was a retired army man, served in India, no family to speak of, lived off a pension and some investments."
Must also consider the dagger. Its choice. It is not random. It is a message, perhaps, or a necessity. As Japp prepared to inspect the back stairs, Poirot drew Hastings aside. "Mon ami, the red herrings multiply. Monsieur Carver, he is too obvious, too nervous. The maid, she is too frightened. But someone in this inn is playing a clever game, and we must not be distracted by the bait." Hastings frowned. "You think Carver's being set up?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, his eyes distant. "Or perhaps he is a piece in a larger puzzle. We must watch, Hastings, and listen. The truth, it is close, but it hides behind the shadows of these red herrings." The day wore on, with Japp's men scouring the inn for further clues, but the atmosphere grew heavier, each guest retreating into their own thoughts. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The Willoughby Inn, shrouded in the persistent October mist, seemed to pulse with unspoken secrets as the investigation into Major Forsyth's murder entered its third day. The parlour, now a hub of tension, was strewn with Inspector Japp's notes and the faint scent of stale tea. Hercule Poirot, seated at a small table near the fireplace, examined a diagram of the inn's first floor, his fingers tracing the corridor where the Major's body was found. Captain Hastings, ever attentive, watched his friend's meticulous movements, sensing that Poirot was closing in on something significant, though what it might be remained elusive. Inspector Japp entered, his face etched with frustration. "Nothing new from the constables, Poirot," he said, tossing his hat onto a chair. "No footprints on the back stairs. Too much traffic from the staff, I reckon. And the Major's records from London? Just a pension and some old army commendations. No hint of enemies or debts, despite that letter." Poirot's eyes gleamed, undeterred. "Patience, mon cher Japp. The absence of evidence, it is not the evidence of absence. We must look closer, at the details that others overlook. The truth, it hides in the small things." Hastings, flipping through his notebook, ventured a guess. "You mean like the dagger, or the cigarette case? They're unusual, but we haven't found anything concrete linking them to anyone." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Précisément, Hastings. But today, we shall uncover a clue, a small inconsistency that speaks louder than words. Come,
Let us revisit the scene of the crime. The trio ascended to the first-floor corridor, where Major Forsyth's body had been found. The spot was marked by a faint chalk outline, the dagger long since removed for evidence. Poirot knelt, his eyes scanning the floorboards, the walls, the nearby door to room. Brushed the table's edge, and he frowned, noting a faint scratch in the polished wood. "Curieux," Poirot murmured, his voice barely audible. "This scratch, it is fresh, no? And here." He pointed to a tiny speck of wax on the floor, almost invisible against the dark wood. "A candle, perhaps, dropped in haste?" Japp squinted at the spot. "Wax? Could be from the maid, cleaning up. Or one of the guests lighting their way at night." "Perhaps," Poirot said, but his tone suggested otherwise. He rose, his gaze shifting to the door of room 7, which had been the Major's. "Let us examine the room once more. The Major, he was a man of habits, and habits, they leave traces." Inside, the room was tidy, almost austere, with a single bed, a wardrobe, and a desk. Poirot moved to the desk, where the half-finished letter to Mr. T had been found. He examined the ink blotter, the pen, the chair's position. Then his eyes fell on a small brass candlestick, its base encrusted with melted wax. He lifted it carefully, noting a faint smear of red wax on its edge. "Voilà," Poirot said, his voice triumphant. "The wax, it matches that on the floor. And this candlestick, it is not in its usual place, I think. See how the dust on the desk is disturbed, as though it was moved recently?" Hastings leaned closer, puzzled. "But what does it mean, Poirot? A candlestick and some wax? Surely that's not enough to point to the killer?" Poirot's eyes sparkled. "Alone, no. But together with other details, it begins to form a picture. Consider, Hastings. The Major is found at 9:00 p.m., stabbed in the corridor, yet Miss Henshaw hears footsteps on the back stairs just before the scream. The cigarette case is found outside, near the locked back door. And now, this wax, this candlestick, moved perhaps to light a secret meeting?" Japp scratched his head. "A meeting? You think the Major was lured upstairs?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, his fingers steepled. "Or perhaps he went willingly to confront someone. The letter in his pocket spoke of debts and a meeting. The candlestick suggests someone needed light in a place where the electric lamps were not sufficient. We must ask ourselves, who was in this corridor and when?" Returning to the parlor, Japp summoned the guests for further questioning, focusing on the candlestick and the wax. Mrs. Langley confirmed that the candlestick was part of the inn's furnishings, kept in each guest room. "But I don't know why it would be moved," she said, her brow furrowed. "We have electric lights in the corridors." Miss Vance, questioned next, was dismissive. "A candlestick? I used mine to read by last night, but I didn't leave my room. You can ask Mr. Carver. We were together until the scream." Carver, predictably nervous, corroborated her story, but added a detail that made Poirot's eyes narrow. 9:00. "I thought it was Ellen, maybe, with a candle." Poirot pounced on this. "A light, monsieur? From where you sat in the parlor, you could see the corridor? Describe this light." Carver hesitated, his hands twitching. "It was faint, like a candle flame, moving toward the back stairs. I didn't think much of it at the time." Dr. Perry, when questioned, claimed to have been in his room, reading by lamplight, not candlelight. Miss Henshaw, however, offered a new observation. "I saw no candle," she said sharply, "but I did notice Ellen carrying a tray upstairs around 8:45. She looked flustered, more than usual." Ellen, called again, denied using a candle. "I didn't need one, sir," she said, her voice trembling. "The corridors are lit, and I had my hands full with the linens." Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. "And yet, mademoiselle, a candlestick was moved, and wax was found. Tell me, did you see anyone else in the corridor before you found the Major?" Ellen's eyes filled with tears. "No, sir, I swear I didn't see anyone. I just found him." As she left, Jap sighed. "This candle business is a wild goose chase, Poirot. It could be nothing. A guest reading late. A maid being careless." "No, Inspector," Poirot said firmly. "It is a clue, a detail that does not fit. The candlestick was moved. The wax dropped in haste. Someone was in that corridor, in the dark, where they did not wish to be seen. And that someone, they are connected to the Major's death." Hastings, scribbling notes, felt a flicker of excitement. "You think the killer used the candle to light their way to the murder?" Poirot's smile was faint. "Perhaps, Hastings. Or perhaps it was the Major himself, meeting his fate. We must reconstruct the timeline. The Major leaves dinner at 8, is seen no more until 9, when Ellen screams. The footsteps, the cigarette case, the wax, they all point to a moment of truth, hidden in the shadows." Jap, unconvinced, turned to practical matters. "I've got a man checking the inn's lighting system. If someone needed a candle, maybe a bulb was out. I'll also have another go at Carver. He's still my best bet." Poirot nodded, but his mind was elsewhere, weaving connections. "Do so, Inspector. But also consider the letter, the dagger, the cigarette case. They are not separate clues, but parts of a whole. The Major's past, it holds the key. We must learn who Mr. T is, and what debt the Major sought to repay." As Jap left to organize his men, Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice low. "Mon ami, the red herrings, they fade, and the truth begins to emerge. The candlestick, the promise of revelation, even as the shadows deepened." Chapter 7. More Lies Surface. The Willoughby Inn, now in its 3rd day of confinement under the shadow of murder, seemed to pulse with a quiet unease, as if the very walls were whispering secrets. The parlour, where Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings had spent much of their time, was bathed in the pale light of an overcast afternoon, the mist outside refusing to lift. Inspector Jap, his patience fraying, had taken to pacing, his boots scuffing the polished floor, as he awaited a telegram from London with more details on Major Forsyth's past. Poirot, seated by the fireplace, appeared serene, his hands folded neatly, but Hastings knew that beneath this calm exterior, his friend's little grey cells were working furiously. 3 days, Poirot," Jap said, stopping mid-stride. 3 days, and we're no closer to pinning this down. Carver's nervous, Ellen's hiding something, and that candle wax business, it's a dead end. The lighting system's fine, no bulbs out. I'm starting to think we're missing something obvious." Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet amusement. "Obvious, mon cher Jap? No, the obvious is what misleads. The truth, it lies in the contradictions, the small lies that unravel the larger ones. Today, we shall peel back another layer of this mystery." Hastings, flipping through his notebook, felt a familiar mix of admiration and impatience. "You've got something up your sleeve, haven't you, Poirot? That candlestick clue, it's nagging at you, isn't it?" "Précisément, Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low. "The candlestick, the wax, the footsteps, they are threads in a tapestry. But now we must tug at other threads, those woven by the hearts of our suspects. They are secrets, they begin to surface." The morning had been spent re-examining the guests' statements, but it was a chance remark from Mrs. Langley during lunch that set the stage for the day's revelations. As she served tea, she mentioned, almost casually, that Major Forsyth had once spoken of a disagreement with a business associate in India years ago. "He didn't say much," she added, "but he called it a betrayal, something about investments gone wrong." Poirot's interest had sharpened instantly, and he requested a private conversation with each guest, this time focusing on their connections to the Major's past. Jap, skeptical but willing, agreed to let Poirot take the lead, provided he could observe. The first to be questioned was Dr. Lawrence Perry, whose scholarly demeanor seemed increasingly strained. He sat stiffly, his spectacles glinting in the firelight. "I barely knew the Major," he said, preempting Poirot's question. "We spoke occasionally, but only about trivial things, weather, books, that sort of thing." Poirot's smile was disarming.
Kill Major Forsyth. It is Indian, you said. Did you ever discuss such artifacts with him? Perhaps his time in India. Dr. Perry's fingers twitched, adjusting his spectacles. No, never. My interest is academic, not personal. I don't know anything about his time in India. But Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. And yet, you arrived at the inn unexpectedly, claiming a need for a quiet retreat. Was it truly research, Doctor, or was there another purpose? A purpose connected to Major Forsyth? Dr. Perry's face flushed, and he stood abruptly. This is absurd. I came to work on my paper, nothing more. I had no reason to harm the Major. Japp raised an eyebrow, but Poirot merely nodded, dismissing him. Merci, Doctor. We shall speak again. As Dr. Perry left, Hastings whispered, He's rattled, Poirot. You think he's lying? Oui, Hastings, Poirot said softly. He conceals something. Perhaps not murder, but a truth that weighs upon him. We shall see. Next came Miss Eleanor Vance, her composure as polished as ever, though her green eyes held a flicker of wariness. I've told you everything, Monsieur Poirot, she said, crossing her arms. I met the Major here at the inn a few months ago. He was a guest, nothing more. Poirot's tone was gentle but probing. And yet, mademoiselle, you are a woman of perception. Did the Major ever speak of his past? Perhaps of a wrong done to him or by him in India? Miss Vance's lips tightened, and for a moment she seemed to weigh her words. He mentioned India once in passing, something about a business deal that cost him dearly. He was bitter about it, but he didn't name names. I didn't care to ask. Poirot leaned forward. And you, mademoiselle, have you ever been to India, or perhaps known someone who was? Her eyes flashed with sudden anger. What are you implying? I've never been to India, and I have no connection to whatever troubles the Major had. You're fishing, Monsieur Poirot. Perhaps, Poirot said, his smile unruffled. But the fish, they swim close to the surface now. As Miss Vance left, Japp muttered, She's sharp, that one. You think she's hiding a connection to the Major's past? Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on the table. She knows more than she says, Inspector. But whether it is guilt or merely caution, we must discover. Julian Carver was next, his nervous energy almost palpable. Before Poirot could speak, he blurted, I didn't know the Major outside the inn. I swear it. My business is in London. Wills, contracts, nothing to do with India. Poirot's voice was calm, almost soothing. Monsieur Carver, you are troubled, yes? Not only by this murder, I think. The maid, Ellen, she knows you. Me with a small matter. That's all. A letter I needed posted discreetly. It had nothing to do with the Major. Japp pounced. A letter? To whom? Carver hesitated, then slumped in his chair. To a client in London. It was personal. I didn't want it traced back to me. Ellen posted it from the village, that's all. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And this letter, it was sent before or after the Major's death? Before, Carver said quickly. The day before. It's got nothing to do with this. Poirot dismissed him, but his expression was thoughtful. A letter, Hastings, he said, as Carver left. Another letter. The web. It grows more tangled. The final interview was with Miss Clara Henshaw, whose sharp eyes missed nothing. She sat with her hands folded, her knitting abandoned.
"I've told you what I saw," she said crisply. "Footsteps, Ellen's nervousness, the Major's agitation. I don't know anything about India." Poirot's tone was respectful. "Mademoiselle, you observe much. Did you ever overhear the Major speak of a man named Mr. T, or perhaps of a debt unpaid?" Miss Henshaw's lips pursed. "Once at dinner a month ago, he mentioned a Thompson, said he was a scoundrel who cheated him years ago, but he was drunk and I didn't pay much mind." Japp scribbled the name eagerly, but Poirot's expression remained impassive. "Merci, mademoiselle. Your memory, it is most valuable." As Miss Henshaw left, Japp turned to Poirot. "Thompson, eh? That could be the Mr. T from the Major's letter. I'll wire London to check on any Thompsons connected to Forsyth's time in India." Poirot nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. "The lies, their surface, Hastings. Carver's secret letter, Miss Vance's bitterness, Dr. Perry's evasion, they all hide something. And the Major's past, it is the key. This Thompson, he may be the shadow behind the dagger." Hastings frowned. "But who's Thompson? One of the guests, or someone outside the inn?" Poirot's smile was faint. "That, mon ami, is what we must discover. The candlestick, the wax, the footsteps, they point to a moment of truth. But the lies, they point to motive. And motive, it will lead us to the killer." As Japp left to send his telegram, the inn's atmosphere grew heavier, each guest retreating into their own secrets. Poirot, however, remained a beacon of calm, his mind weaving the tangled threads into a pattern only he could yet see. Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The Willoughby Inn, now in its 4th day of confinement, seemed to sag under the weight of suspicion and secrets. The mist outside had given way to a steady drizzle, tension like a physical presence, while Poirot, as ever, remained composed, his green eyes sharp with purpose. Inspector Japp, clutching a telegram from London, looked grim. "We've got something on this Thompson, Poirot," he said, spreading the paper on the table. "A Robert Thompson, business partner of Major Forsyth in India, 1890s. They invested in a trading venture that went bust. Thompson vanished and Forsyth lost a fortune. No record of him since, but the Major held a grudge, according to old army contacts." Poirot's fingers steepled, his expression thoughtful. "Most interesting, Inspector. This Thompson, he is the Mr. T of the Major's letter, perhaps, but is he here, among us, or a ghost from the past?" Hastings frowned, his mind racing. Could one of the guests be Thompson, using a false name? Dr. Perry, maybe, with his interest in Indian artifacts. Poirot's smile was faint. "A possibility, Hastings, but we must not leap to conclusions. The truth, it is close now, and it will reveal itself through the cracks in these carefully built facades." The day's interviews began with a sense of urgency, as Poirot sensed the moment was ripe for a breakthrough. He had requested that the guests be questioned together, in the parlour, to observe their reactions to one another. Japp, though sceptical, agreed, and the group assembled. Mrs. Langley, pale but composed, Miss Eleanor Vance, her beauty tinged with defiance, Julian Carver, fidgeting nervously, Dr. Lawrence Perry, his spectacles fogging slightly, Miss Clara Henshaw, her sharp eyes darting, and Ellen the maid, hovering at the edge, her hands trembling. Poirot stood, his small figure commanding the room. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice smooth and deliberate, "we are gathered to discuss a matter most grave. Major Forsyth was murdered, and the truth lies among us. I ask you now to consider a name. Robert Thompson. Does it stir a memory?" The effect was immediate. Mrs. Langley's hand flew to her throat, Miss Vance's eyes narrowed, and Carver's face drained of colour. Dr. Perry adjusted his spectacles, while Miss Henshaw's lips pursed tightly. Ellen let out a small gasp, quickly stifled. Japp pounced. "Well, who knows this Thompson? Speak up!" Mrs. Langley spoke first. her voice unsteady. I heard the Major mention him once, as Miss Henshaw said. A business partner who wronged him. But I never met the man. Miss Vance's tone was sharp. I told you, Monsieur Poirot. The Major spoke of a bad deal in India. I assumed Thompson was involved, but I don't know him. Carver's voice was almost a whisper. I never heard the name until now. I swear it. Dr. Perry cleared his throat. Thompson was a name in the Major's stories, yes, but I have no personal knowledge of him. My interest in—
He's hiding well. Poirot's gaze settled on Ellen, who shrank under his scrutiny. And you, mademoiselle? The name Thompson, does it mean anything to you? Ellen's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. No, sir. I don't know any Thompson. I just want this to be over. But the dam broke. Ellen's composure shattered, and she sank into a chair, sobbing. I can't do this anymore, she cried, her voice raw. I didn't kill him, I swear. But I saw something that night, and I was too scared to say. The room froze, all eyes on the maid. Japp stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. What did you see, Ellen? Tell us now. Ellen wiped her eyes, her voice trembling. It was just before I found the Major. I was coming up the back stairs with the linens and I saw Mr. Carver in the corridor near room 7. He was holding something, a letter, I think, and he looked scared. I hid behind the door and then I heard the Major's voice, angry, saying something about paying what's owed. Then Mr. Carver ran off and I went to the linen closet. That's when I found the Major, dead. Carver leapt to his feet, his face ashen. That's a lie. I was in the parlour with Miss Vance. I never went upstairs. Miss Vance's voice was icy.
You did leave the parlour, Julian. You said you needed air just before 9. You were gone for a few minutes.
Carver's mouth opened and closed, his hand shaking. I went to the garden, that's all. I didn't go upstairs. I didn't kill him. Poirot's voice cut through the chaos, calm and commanding. Monsieur Carver, you have spoken of a letter you asked Ellen to post. Was this the same letter you held in the corridor, perhaps? A letter connected to Major Forsyth? Carver collapsed back into his chair, his voice barely audible. It wasn't. It wasn't what you think. I owed the Major money, a loan from months ago. He was pressing me to repay it, threatening to ruin me. I wrote to a friend in London asking for help. That's what Ellen posted. But I didn't kill him. Japp's eyes narrowed. A loan? Why didn't you mention this before? I was ashamed, Carver whispered. I'm a solicitor. I'm supposed to be respectable. If it got out, my career would be finished. Poirot's gaze shifted to Ellen. And you, mademoiselle, why did you not speak of this sooner? Ellen's sobs quieted, but her voice was small. I was scared, sir. Mr. Carver, he's been kind to me, helped me when I needed it. I didn't want to get him in trouble, and I thought maybe I'd imagined it with the shock of finding the Major. The room was silent, the weight of Ellen's confession settling over the group. Mrs. Langley looked stricken, Miss Vance's expression was unreadable, and Dr. Perry's hands trembled slightly. Miss Henshaw's eyes gleamed with something like satisfaction, as if she anticipated such a revelation. Japp turned to Poirot. This puts Carver in the frame, Poirot. He's got a motive, debt, threats, and now a witness placing him at the scene. Poirot nodded, but his expression was cautious. It appears so, Inspector. And yet the picture is not complete. Monsieur Carver, he is a man of weakness, perhaps, but a murderer? We must consider all the threads, the letter, the dagger, the candlestick, the footsteps. They do not yet align perfectly. Hastings, scribbling furiously, whispered, You don't think Carver did it, do you? Ellen's story sounds convincing. Poirot's smile was faint. Convincing? Oui, but truth is not always what it seems. Ellen has broken the silence, and that is good. But her truth, it is only partial. There is more to uncover, Hastings, and the heart of this mystery lies in the Major's past and in the one who wielded the dagger. As Japp prepared to question Carver further, Poirot drew Hastings aside. Mon ami, the emotional turning point, it has come. The secrets, they spill forth, but they are not all we seek. The name Thompson, the debt, the candle wax, they are pieces of a puzzle, and we are close to seeing the whole. The parlour emptied, the guests retreating under Japp's stern orders to remain available. The inn felt smaller, its walls closing in, as the truth began to take shape, guided by Poirot's unerring logic and the cracks in the suspect's carefully guarded facades. Chapter 9. The Trap. The Willoughby Inn, now in its 5th day of confinement, seemed to hum with a taut anticipation, as if the very air awaited the unravelling of Major Forsyth's murder. The parlour, bathed in the weak light of a drizzly afternoon, had become the stage for Hercule Poirot's next move. Captain Hastings, seated near the fireplace with his notebook, felt a thrill of excitement. He knew Poirot was preparing to set a trap, a psychological gambit to coax the truth from the tangle of lies and half-truths. Inspector Japp, though weary from days of dead ends, leaned against the mantel, watching Poirot with a mix of skepticism and hope. Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his small, immaculate figure radiating quiet authority. His green eyes swept over the assembled guests, summoned once more to the parlour. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, her face drawn with strain, Miss Eleanor Vance, her composure fraying at the edges, Julian Carver, pale and fidgeting, Dr. Lawrence Perry, his spectacles glinting nervously, Miss Clara Henshaw, her sharp gaze unwavering, and Ellen, the maid, hovering near the door, her hands clasped tightly. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began. "Rises." Japp raised an eyebrow. "What's this, Poirot? Another of your theatrical stunts?" Poirot's smile was serene. "Not a stunt, Inspector, but a method. The murderer, they are among us, and they believe themselves clever, but Hercule Poirot, he is cleverer still. Let us begin." He turned to the group, his gaze lingering on each face. "We have learned much. A letter threatening Major Forsyth with exposure of past debts, a cigarette case found in the garden suggesting a meeting outside, a candlestick moved from its place with wax dropped in haste, footsteps on the back stairs just before the scream, and a name, Robert Thompson, a man who wronged the Major in India long ago. These are the threads, and now we weave them together." Mrs. Langley's voice was faint. "Monsieur Poirot, surely you don't think one of us is this Thompson?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Perhaps, madame, or perhaps not. But someone here knows more than they have said. Let us consider the night of the murder. Major Forsyth leaves dinner at 8 p.m., agitated, perhaps expecting a confrontation. At 8:45, footsteps are heard on the back stairs, and a flickering light is seen in the corridor. At 9, Ellen finds the Major dead, stabbed with a dagger taken from the dining room. And Monsieur Carver, he is seen near room 7 holding a letter. Carver leapt to his feet, his voice shrill. "I told you! I didn't kill him! I was in the garden, not upstairs! Ellen's lying!" Ellen's eyes widened, and she shrank back. "I'm not lying, sir. I saw you, I swear it." Miss Vance's tone was icy. "Julian, you did leave the parlour. You said you needed air, but you were gone longer than you admitted. What were you doing?" Carver's face crumpled, and he sank back into his chair. I was in the garden, trying to clear my head. The Major was hounding me about that loan. I didn't go upstairs, I swear." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. "Monsieur Carver, your fear, it is evident. But let us consider another possibility. The letter in the Major's pocket spoke of debts and a meeting. Suppose the Major was lured to the corridor, not by you, but by someone else, someone who knew of his past, his shame, his connection to Robert Thompson. Dr. Perry adjusted his spectacles, his voice unsteady. "This is speculation, Monsieur Poirot. You've no proof anyone here is Thompson." Poirot's smile was sharp. "Proof, Doctor? It comes, but first we must test the waters. Let us speak of the candlestick. It was moved from the Major's room and wax was found on the floor. Why? Because someone needed light in a place where the electric lamps were not enough, or perhaps where they did not wish to be seen. And the dagger, why choose such a weapon? It is intimate, personal, a message of betrayal." Miss Henshaw's voice cut through the tension. "You're saying the killer wanted—"
"Précisément, mademoiselle," Poirot said. "The dagger. It is not a weapon of convenience, but of intent. And now, I propose a test. Inspector Japp, if you would be so kind as to bring the dagger from evidence." Japp hesitated, but nodded, retrieving the dagger from a locked case. Its ornate hilt gleamed in the firelight, and the guests shifted uneasily as Poirot held it up, careful not to touch it directly. "This dagger," he said, "was taken from the dining room. But who took it, and when? I suggest it was removed before dinner by someone who planned this act, and I believe one of you knows more than you have said." He turned to Ellen, his voice gentle but firm. "Mademoiselle, you move freely through this inn. Did you see anyone near the dining room's weapon display before dinner?" Ellen's hands twisted in her apron, and her voice was barely audible. I saw Dr. Perry there, sir, that afternoon. He was looking at the weapons, touching them. I thought he was just curious." Dr. Perry's face went white. "That's preposterous. I was studying them, yes, as an antiquarian, but I didn't take anything. This is slander." Poirot's gaze shifted to Mrs. Langley. "And you, madame, you oversee the inn. Did you notice the dagger missing before the murder?" Mrs. Langley shook her head, her voice trembling. "No, I didn't check. The display is decorative. I never thought anyone would touch it." Poirot nodded, then turned to the group. "Let us imagine the scene. The Major is lured to the corridor, perhaps by a note, perhaps by a promise. He carries a candlestick, expecting a secret meeting, but instead he meets death. The killer. They strike with the dagger, and in their haste, they drop wax. They flee via the back stairs, leaving the cigarette case in the garden as a false trail." Miss Vance's voice was sharp. "You're saying it was planned, not a spur-of-the-moment act?" "Oui, mademoiselle," Poirot said. "And now, I ask you all to consider, who among you had reason to hate Major Forsyth? Who knew of Robert Thompson, of the debts, of the betrayal in India?" The room was silent, but the tension was palpable. Carver's hands shook. Dr. Perry's spectacles slipped down his nose, and Mrs. Langley's eyes filled with tears. Miss Henshaw watched, her expression unreadable, while Ellen seemed on the verge of collapse. Poirot's voice softened, but his words were like a blade. "The truth cannot hide forever. One of you knows more."
"Doc!"
Hastings, his heart pounding, whispered, "You sure the killer's among them, Poirot? What if it's someone we haven't considered?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Mon ami, the killer is here in this inn. The trap is set, and the truth, it will not escape. We wait, Hastings, and we watch." The parlor emptied, the drizzle outside growing heavier, as the Willoughby Inn braced for the revelations that Poirot's trap would surely bring. Chapter 10.
The reveal. The Willoughby Inn, cloaked in the gloom of a rainy evening, seemed to hold its breath as the fifth day of the investigation drew to a close. The parlour, now a familiar stage for Hercule Poirot's methodical unravelling of Major Forsyth's murder, was lit by the soft glow of lamps, casting long shadows across the faces of the assembled guests. Captain Hastings, seated with his notebook, felt a pulse of anticipation. Poirot's trap, set earlier that day, had stirred the waters, and now the detective was ready to unveil the truth. Inspector Japp stood by the fireplace, his arms crossed, his expression a mix of skepticism and expectation. Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his small, immaculate figure commanding absolute attention. His green eyes gleamed with quiet triumph, and his moustaches twitched as he surveyed the group. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, her hands clasped tightly. Miss Eleanor Vance, her composure brittle. Julian Carver, pale and trembling. Dr. Lawrence Perry, his spectacles glinting nervously. Miss Clara Henshaw, her sharp eyes watchful. And Ellen, the maid, standing at the edge, her face pale with fear. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice smooth and resonant. "The time has come to lay bare the truth of Major Forsyth's murder. Hercule Poirot has promised you a solution, and that solution it is now complete. The threads of this mystery, the letter, the dagger, the candlestick, the cigarette case, the footsteps, they have been woven into a tapestry, and the picture, it is clear at last." Japp shifted, his voice gruff. "Get on with it, Poirot. Who's the killer?" Poirot raised a hand, his smile serene. "Patience, mon cher Japp. The truth, it requires order and method. Let us reconstruct the night of the murder, step by step, and see how the pieces fit." He turned to the group, his gaze piercing. Major Reginald Forsyth was a man with a past that haunted him. In India, many years ago, he entered a business venture with a man named Robert Thompson. The venture failed, and Thompson vanished, leaving the Major with...
Backstairs, and Monsieur Carver sees a flickering light in the corridor. At 9 o'clock, Ellen finds the Major dead, stabbed with a dagger from the dining room. The cigarette case found in the garden suggests a meeting outside, yet the Major was killed indoors. The candlestick, moved from his room with wax on the floor, speaks of a secret act in the dark. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. The obvious suspect, it is Monsieur Carver. He owed the Major money, a loan that threatened his reputation. Ellen saw him in the corridor, holding a letter, and he admits to leaving the parlour. But is he the killer? No, mes amis, he is not. Carver gasped, his relief palpable, but Poirot continued. Monsieur Carver, he is guilty of weakness, of fear, but not of murder. The letter he held was not the one in the Major's pocket, but one he wrote to a friend, seeking funds to repay his debt. Ellen's testimony, it was truthful, but incomplete. She saw Carver, yes, but she did not see the murder. Poirot turned to Ellen, whose eyes widened. Mademoiselle, you were frightened, not only of the murder, but of what you knew. You saw more than you admitted, did you not? Ellen's hands twisted in her apron, and she nodded, tears spilling. I saw someone else, sir, after Mr. Carver ran off. I didn't say because I was scared. It was Dr. Perry, coming out of room 7, just before I found the Major. Dr. Perry leapt to his feet, his face ashen, That's a lie. I was in my room reading. I never went near room 7. Poirot's voice was calm but unyielding. No, Doctor, you were not. The candlestick tells us so. It was moved from the Major's room, and wax was found in the corridor. You, with your interest in Indian artifacts, examined the dagger in the dining room that afternoon. You took it, did you not, to confront the Major about a past he shared with you? Dr. Perry's hands shook, but he shook his head vehemently. This is absurd. I'm a doctor, not a murderer. Poirot's eyes gleamed. But you are also Robert Thompson, are you not? The man who betrayed Major Forsyth in India, who vanished with his money, leaving him to ruin. You came to this inn under a false name, seeking to make amends, or perhaps to silence him. The room gasped, and Dr. Perry's spectacles slipped down his nose. That's preposterous. I'm Lawrence Perry, not Thompson. You've no proof. Poirot's smile was triumphant. Proof, Doctor? It is in the details. The letter—
But why? Poirot turned to her. Madame, the Major had discovered Dr. Perry's true identity. The letter he received was a warning from Perry, offering to repay the old debt in exchange for silence. But the Major, he was a proud man, and he refused. The confrontation in the corridor was their final meeting. Dr. Perry collapsed into his chair, his face buried in his hands. It wasn't meant to happen, he murmured, his voice breaking. I just wanted to talk, to explain. He was furious, waving that dagger, saying he'd ruin me. I took it from him, and in the struggle, it happened. I didn't mean to kill him. Japp stepped forward, his voice firm. That's enough, Perry, or Thompson. You're under arrest for the murder of Major Forsyth. As the constables moved to restrain Dr. Perry, Poirot continued, his voice soft but clear. The cigarette case. It was a clever touch, Doctor. You dropped it in the garden to suggest an outside intruder, but the locked doors betrayed you. The footsteps on the back stairs, they were yours, fleeing after the act. And the wax, it fell from the candlestick you carried, a small mistake that led Hercule Poirot to the truth. The guests sat in stunned silence, their faces a mix of shock and relief. Ellen sobbed quietly, Miss Vance's composure cracked, and Carver looked as if he might faint. Miss Henshaw's eyes gleamed with grim satisfaction, while Mrs. Langley clutched the arm of her chair. Poirot turned to Japp. The case, it is closed, Inspector. The little grey cells, they have done their work. Japp nodded, his expression grudgingly impressed. You've done it again, Poirot. I'll take it from here. As Dr. Perry was led away, Hastings leaned toward Poirot, his voice low. How did you know, Poirot? The candlestick? The letter? It all seemed so muddled. Poirot's smile was serene. Mon ami, it is always in the details. The candlestick, it did not belong in the corridor. The letter, it named a man who could not hide forever. And Dr. Perry, his fear, his knowledge of the dagger, they were the keys. The truth, it always reveals itself to those who seek it with method. The parlour emptied, the weight of the revelation lingering like the rain outside. Poirot, unruffled, adjusted his tie, ready to step back into the quiet of his own world, leaving the Willoughby Inn forever changed. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The Willoughby Inn, released from the grip of its grim drama, seemed to exhale as the evening of the 5th day settled over St. Mary's Hollow. The rain had ceased, leaving a damp chill in the air, and the parlour, now emptied of its tense assembly, felt almost serene. The fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow over— Once felt a quiet satisfaction. The mystery was solved. Yet he sensed Poirot had more to say.
Inspector Japp, bustling with the energy of a case concluded, was overseeing the final arrangements for Dr. Lawrence Perry's, or rather Robert Thompson's, transfer to the local constabulary. The inn's guests, though free to leave, lingered in a state of subdued shock, their conversations hushed as they processed the revelation of the murderer in their midst. Hastings, however, was drawn to Poirot's calm presence, knowing his friend often used these moments to impart some deeper insight. "Well, Poirot," Hastings said, breaking the silence, "you've done it again. Dr. Perry, Thompson, caught in your trap. I must say I thought Carver was our man until that last moment. How do you always see what we miss?" Poirot's smile was faint, almost melancholic. "Mon ami, it is not that I see more, but that I look differently. The human heart, it is a complex thing, full of contradictions. To solve a crime, one must understand not only the facts but the passions, the fears, the regrets that drive men to act." Hastings leaned forward, intrigued. "You mean the Major's past with Thompson? That old betrayal in India?" "Oui, Hastings," Poirot said, his voice soft. "The Major, he carried his anger like a wound, never healed. And Thompson, Dr. Perry, he carried his guilt, his fear of exposure. Their meeting in this inn, it was not chance but fate. The letter, the dagger, the candlestick, these were not mere clues, but symbols of a tragedy long in the making." Hastings frowned, turning over the details in his mind. But why did Perry come here at all? If he was hiding as Dr. Perry, why risk meeting the Major? Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet intensity. "That, mon ami, is the heart of it. Perry came to make amends, or so he claimed. The letter he sent, offering to repay the debt, was his attempt to quiet the past. But the Major, he was a proud man, unforgiving. He saw Thompson's offer as an insult, a reminder of his shame. Their confrontation, it was inevitable. And in that moment of rage, Perry acted, not with premeditation perhaps, but with desperation." Hastings nodded, piecing it together. "And the candlestick, the wax, that was his mistake, wasn't it? Leaving a trail you could follow. Précisément," Poirot said, his fingers tapping lightly on the arm of his chair. "The candlestick. It was a small thing, but it spoke of secrecy, of a man moving in the dark to hide his actions. The wax on the floor, the scratch on the table, these were the traces of his fear. And the dagger, taken from the dining room, it was a choice born of the past, a weapon that linked him to the Major's time in India." Hastings shook his head, marked.
You underestimate yourself, Hastings. You see, you observe, and you feel. That is your strength. But for Hercule Poirot, it is the order, the method, the little grey cells. They arrange the chaos into a pattern, and in that pattern, the truth cannot hide. The door opened, and Mrs. Langley entered, her face weary but composed. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, her voice steady despite the strain. "I wanted to thank you. This terrible business has shaken us all, but knowing the truth, it brings some peace." Poirot inclined his head, his expression courteous. "Madame, it is my duty to uncover the truth, however painful. The Willoughby Inn, it will heal in time, and you are strong to carry on." Mrs. Langley's eyes glistened, but she managed a small smile. "I hope so. I never imagined such a thing could happen here. Poor Major Forsyth, and Dr. Perry. To think they carried such a burden all these years." Poirot nodded, his gaze distant. "The past, madame, it is a shadow that follows us all. For some, it becomes a chain. For others, a lesson. You, I think, will choose the latter. As Mrs. Langley left, Japp returned, his coat buttoned and his hat in hand. "Well, Poirot, we're off. Perry's in custody, and I've got a report to file. You sure you don't want to come to the station? Make it official?" Poirot waved a hand dismissively. "No, Inspector. The paperwork, it is for you. Hercule Poirot, he has done his part. The rest, it is for the law." Japp grinned, a rare moment of warmth. "You're a queer one, Poirot, but I'll give you this. You're the best. Come on, Hastings, unless you're staying to write a novel about this." Hastings chuckled, rising from his chair. "Not quite, Japp, but I'll admit, it's been a case to remember." As Japp left to organize his men, Poirot stood, adjusting his tie with meticulous care. "Come, Hastings," he said, his voice light. "The Willoughby Inn has had enough of Hercule Poirot. Let us return to London, where the air is less heavy with secrets." Hastings followed, pausing at the door to glance back at the parlour. The other guests, Miss Vance, Carver, Miss Henshaw, and Ellen, had begun to pack, their faces a mix of relief and lingering unease. The inn, though scarred by the events of the past days, would endure, its quiet charm slowly reclaiming its place. As they stepped into the cool evening, Hastings ventured one last truth laid bare. But Hastings knew that Poirot's reflections would linger, a quiet reminder of the complexities of the human heart and the relentless pursuit of order in a chaotic world. Chapter 12. The Echoes of Truth. The Willoughby Inn, though freed from the immediate shadow of Major Forsyth's murder, seemed to carry a lingering melancholy as the sixth day dawned. The rain had finally cleared, and a pale sun broke through the clouds, casting tentative light across the rolling hills of St. Mary's Hollow. Inside, the parlour was quiet, its usual bustle replaced by an air of subdued reflection. Hercule Poirot, seated by the window with a cup of tisane, appeared as composed as ever, his green eyes scanning the room with a thoughtful intensity. Captain Hastings, packing his suitcase in preparation for their departure to London, felt a mix of relief and curiosity. The case was solved, but he sensed Poirot was not yet finished with the inn's secrets. The other guests, Mrs. Beatrice Langley, Miss Eleanor Vance, Julian Carver, Miss Clara Henshaw, and Ellen, had begun to resume their routines, though their interactions were marked by a cautious distance. Dr. Lawrence Perry, now revealed as Robert Thompson, was in custody, and Inspector Japp had departed the previous evening, leaving behind a constable to tie up loose ends. Yet Hastings couldn't shake the feeling that something remained unresolved, a thread Poirot had yet to fully unravel. As Hastings folded his shirts, Poirot set down his cup, his expression pensive. "Mon ami," he said, his voice soft, "you are eager to return to the comforts of London, yes? But the mind of Hercule Poirot, it lingers here, in the echoes of this case." Hastings paused, his curiosity piqued. "Echoes, Poirot? The case is closed, isn't it? Perry, Thompson, confessed. The dagger, the candlestick, the letter. It all fits." Poirot's smile was faint, almost wistful. "Oui, Hastings. The murder is solved. But the truth, it is like a symphony. There are notes that linger, harmonics that resonate beyond the final chord. There are questions, small questions, that remain." Hastings sat on the edge of his chair, his suitcase forgotten. "What questions? You don't think Perry was lying, do you?" "No,
Non, Poirot said, waving a hand. His confession, it was genuine, born of guilt and desperation. But there are other secrets in this inn. Secrets that did not lead to murder, but are no less significant. The letter Monsieur Carver asked Ellen to post, for example. It troubles me still. Hastings frowned, recalling Carver's nervous admission.
More. Hastings followed Poirot to the kitchen where Ellen was polishing silver, her movements mechanical, her face still pale. She started at their approach, her hands trembling slightly. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, her voice low. "Is something wrong?" Poirot's tone was gentle, almost fatherly. "Mademoiselle, you have been most brave in this affair, telling us what you saw. But there is one small matter, the letter Monsieur Carver gave you to post. Can you tell us more? To whom was it addressed, and why the need for secrecy?" Ellen's eyes darted to the door, as if expecting Carver to appear. It was to a Mr. Hargreaves in London, sir. Mr. Carver said it was private, that he didn't want anyone at the inn to know. He gave me £1 to post it in the village, so it wouldn't go through the inn's postbag. Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. "And did you read this letter, mademoiselle?" "No, sir," Ellen said quickly, her cheeks flushing. "It was sealed. I just did as he asked." Poirot nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful." As they returned to the parlour, Hastings whispered, "What's this about, Poirot? Carver's letter doesn't seem connected to the murder." "Perhaps not directly," Poirot said, his voice low, "but it is a thread, Hastings, a thread that leads to another secret. Monsieur Carver, he is a man of appearances, a solicitor who fears disgrace. This letter to Hargreaves, it suggests a deeper trouble, one he wished to hide even from the Major." Before Hastings could press further, Miss Clara Henshaw entered, her knitting needles clicking softly. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her tone crisp, "I hear you're leaving us. A pity. I've grown accustomed to your questions." Poirot's smile was courteous. "Mademoiselle, your observations have been most valuable. But tell me, before we part, did you ever overhear Monsieur Carver speak of a man named Hargreaves?" Miss Henshaw's eyes narrowed, and she paused her knitting. "Hargreaves? Yes, once, a few weeks ago. The Major was dining with Carver, and I heard him mention a Hargreaves. Said he was a lawyer who'd handled some trouble for him in London. Carver looked uncomfortable, changed the subject quickly." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Most interesting. And the Major, he spoke of this Hargreaves with respect or with anger?" "Anger," Miss Henshaw said firmly. "He called him a meddling fool. I didn't think much of it at the time, just men's talk." Poirot thanked her, and as she left, he turned to Hastings. "The picture,
"Poirot," he said, startled. "I thought the case was over. Why are you still questioning me?" Poirot's voice was calm but firm. "Monsieur, the murder is solved, but there are echoes, as I have said. The letter you gave Ellen to post to a Mr. Hargreaves, what was its purpose?" Carver's hands shook, and he looked away, his voice barely audible. "It was a personal matter. Hargreaves is my colleague, a lawyer. I needed his help with a mistake I made. A client's funds mismanaged. The Major found out, threatened to expose me unless I repaid him. I wrote to Hargreaves for advice, that's all." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And this mistake, it was serious, yes? Serious enough to ruin you?" Carver nodded, his shoulders slumping. "Yes. I didn't kill the Major, but I was terrified he'd ruin me. I'm not proud of it, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot's expression softened.
The truth, it is painful, but it frees us, monsieur. You have done no murder, but you have carried a burden. Go now, and make amends.
As Carver retreated, Hastings shook his head. Poor chap. He's no killer, but he's been living in fear. Do you think that's the last of the secrets, Poirot? Poirot's smile was enigmatic.
Perhaps, Hastings, but the human heart, it is a labyrinth. There may be other secrets in this inn, but they are not ours to uncover. Our work here, it is done.
They returned to the parlour to collect their things, the inn's quiet charm slowly reasserting itself. Mrs. Langley approached, her face weary but grateful.
Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, I cannot thank you enough. The Willoughby will recover in time, thanks to you.
Poirot bowed slightly.
Madame, it is my duty to bring order to chaos. May your inn find peace.
As they stepped into the waiting car, Hastings glanced back at the Willoughby Inn, its ivy-clad walls glowing in the fading light. It's been quite a case, Poirot, he said. But I'm glad to be heading home. Poirot's eyes twinkled.
Home, yes, Hastings. But the mind of Hercule Poirot, it is never at rest. The echoes of truth, they follow us always.
The car rolled away, leaving the inn behind, its secrets laid bare, but its story far from over. Chapter 13, The Unseen Threads. The Willoughby Inn, now in its 6th day since Major Forsyth's murder, seemed to settle into an uneasy calm as the sun dipped low over St. Mary's Hollow. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and fading autumn leaves. Inside, the parlour retained its familiar warmth, but the atmosphere was tinged with a lingering disquiet, as if the resolution of the crime had not fully dispelled the shadows it cast. Hercule Poirot, others.
Poirot, Hastings said, closing his suitcase with a snap. We're leaving in an hour, aren't we? The case is solved, Perry's in custody, and Carver's confessed his troubles. Surely there's nothing left to do here. Poirot turned, his green eyes gleaming with a familiar spark. Mon ami, the case of the murder? Oui, it is solved. But the human heart, it is never so simple. There are threads, unseen threads, that still tug at the mind of Hercule Poirot. Small inconsistencies, moments that do not align perfectly with the picture we have painted. Hastings frowned, setting his suitcase aside. Inconsistencies? What do you mean? Perry admitted to being Thompson, and his confession fits the evidence. The dagger, the candlestick, the letter. Poirot's smile was faint, almost enigmatic. It fits, yes, but not with the elegance of truth. The confession of Dr. Perry, it is sincere, but it is also convenient. I wish to examine one final detail before we depart. The role of Mademoiselle Ellen, and the letter she posted for Monsieur Carver. Hastings raised an eyebrow. Ellen? You think she's hiding more? She's already admitted to seeing Carver and Perry in the corridor. Précisément, Poirot said, his voice low. But her fear, it is deeper than that of a mere witness. She is a young woman, easily overlooked, yet she moves through this inn like a shadow, seeing much, hearing much. Let us speak with her once more, in private. They found Ellen in the kitchen, scrubbing pots with a vigor that suggested she was trying to erase more than just grease. Her hands stilled as Poirot and Hastings entered, her eyes wide with apprehension. Monsieur Poirot, sir, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. I thought you were leaving. Is something wrong? Poirot's tone was gentle, almost soothing. Mademoiselle, you have been most courageous in this affair. But there is one small matter that troubles Hercule Poirot. The letter you posted for Monsieur Carver, to this Mr. Hargreaves. You said it was sealed, but did you, perhaps, overhear anything about its contents? Or did Monsieur Carver say why it was so urgent? Ellen's cheeks flushed, and she looked down at her hands. I didn't read it, sir, I swear. But Mr. Carver, he was desperate when he gave it to me. He said it was his only chance to make things right. I thought he meant the money he owed the Major, but he was so nervous, I didn't ask more. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And when you saw him in the corridor, just before the murder, holding a letter, was it the same one? Ellen hesitated, her fingers twisting in her apron. I don't know.
Expression thoughtful. Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful. One last question. Did anyone else in the inn speak to you of Monsieur Carver or of this Hargreaves? Ellen's eyes flickered with something like fear. Miss Vance, sir. The day before the murder, she asked me if Mr. Carver had been sending letters. I said I didn't know, but she looked suspicious, like she didn't believe me. Poirot's smile was faint, but triumphant. Very good, mademoiselle. You may return to your work. As they left the kitchen, Hastings whispered, What's this about, Poirot? Miss Vance asking about Carver's letters? Do you think she's involved somehow? Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on his cane. Not in the murder, Hastings, but in the web of secrets that surrounds it. Miss Vance, she is a woman of sharp intelligence, and she observes much. Her interest in Carver's letters suggests she knows more of his troubles than she has admitted. Let us speak with her. They found Miss Eleanor Vance in the dining room, arranging flowers in a vase with a precision that seemed almost defiant. Her auburn hair gleamed in the soft light, but her green eyes were wary as Poirot approached. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her tone cool, I thought your work here was done. Why seek me out now? Poirot bowed slightly, his manner courteous. Mademoiselle, the murder is solved, but there are echoes, small matters that linger. You asked Ellen about Monsieur Carver's letters, did you not? Why such interest in his correspondence? Miss Vance's hands paused, and for a moment her composure faltered. I was curious, that's all. Julian, Mr. Carver, has been acting strangely for weeks, distracted, secretive. I overheard him mention Hargreaves once, and I wondered if it was connected to his agitation. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. And what did you know of this Hargreaves, mademoiselle? Did the Major ever speak of him in your presence? Miss Vance's lips tightened, and she set down a flower with deliberate care. The Major mentioned Hargreaves once, during a dinner some weeks ago. He said he was a lawyer who'd meddled in his affairs, caused him trouble. I didn't think much of it until I saw Julian's behavior. I thought perhaps he was in some sort of trouble with the Major. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. And did you suspect Monsieur Carver of more than financial trouble? Of perhaps a connection to the Major's death? Miss Vance's eyes flashed. I did wonder. Yes. He was so nervous, always looking over his shoulder, but I never thought he'd kill anyone. I just wanted to know what was going on. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Merci, mademoiselle, your candor, it is most illuminating. As they returned to the parlor, Hastings,
Does it fit with Perry's confession? Poirot's eyes gleamed. It fits, Hastings, because it reveals the unseen threads. Carver's letter to Hargreaves was not just about a loan, but about a deeper shame, a mismanagement of funds, perhaps, that the Major discovered. Miss Vance, she sensed this, and her questions to Ellen were an attempt to protect herself, or perhaps to uncover leverage. These are not matters of murder, but of human frailty, and they color the tapestry of this case. Hastings frowned, still puzzled. But if Perry's the killer, why bother with these details? Poirot's voice was soft, almost philosophical. Because, mon ami, the truth is not only about the crime, but about the lives it touches. The Willoughby Inn, it is a microcosm of human weakness,
guilt, fear, ambition. To understand the murder, we must understand those who surrounded it. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Langley approached, her face weary but resolute. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, the car is ready. I hope you'll remember the Willoughby kindly, despite all this." Poirot bowed, his expression warm. "Madame, the Willoughby will endure as will you. The truth, it is painful, but it cleanses." They stepped into the evening, the inn's lights fading behind them. Hastings glanced at Poirot, sensing his friend's quiet satisfaction. "You've tied up the loose ends, haven't you?" he said. "Even the ones that didn't matter to the murder." Poirot's smile was serene. "All threads matter, Hastings. They make the tapestry complete." Chapter 14. The Final Shadows. The Willoughby Inn stood bathed in the soft glow of twilight, its ivy-clad walls catching the last rays of the setting sun, as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings prepared to depart. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from the village of St. Mary's Hollow, and the inn seemed to have regained a fragile semblance of its former tranquility. Inside the parlour, the guests were packing their belongings, their movements subdued, as if the weight of Major Forsyth's murder still lingered like a ghost. Poirot, standing by the car with his suitcase at his feet, adjusted his hat with meticulous care, his green eyes scanning the inn one final time. Hastings, beside him, felt a sense of closure, but also a nagging curiosity. Poirot's focus on the unseen threads of the case suggested there was still something left to uncover. "Poirot," Hastings said, securing his own suitcase in the car. "We've solved the murder, tied up Carver's secret, and even sorted out Miss Vance's suspicions. Surely that's the end of it. Or are you still chasing those echoes of yours?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic, his moustaches twitching slightly. "Mon ami, the murder, it is solved. Oui. Dr. Perry, Robert Thompson, is in custody, his guilt confirmed. But the echoes, as you call them, they are not mere noise. They are the whispers of human
Nature. The final shadows that linger in a place touched by tragedy. There is one last thread, Hastings, that I wish to examine before we leave. The role of Madame Langley. Hastings blinked, surprised. "Mrs. Langley? She's just the innkeeper, Poirot. She's been nothing but cooperative, shaken by the whole affair. You don't suspect her of anything, do you?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Suspect? No, not of murder. But Madame Langley, she is the heart of this inn, and she knows more than she has shared. Her silence, it is not deceit, but protection, perhaps of herself, perhaps of another. Let us have one final conversation." They found Mrs. Beatrice Langley in the dining room, overseeing the removal of the decorative weapons display from above the fireplace. The spot where the dagger had hung was conspicuously empty, and her hands trembled slightly as she directed a young porter. She turned at their approach, her silver hair catching the lamplight, a face weary but composed. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, managing a small smile. "I thought you'd be on your way by now. Is there something else you need?" Poirot bowed slightly, his manner courteous but probing. "Madame, you have been a gracious host in difficult times, and for that, Hercule Poirot is grateful. But before we depart, there is a question, a small matter, that lingers. You spoke of Major Forsyth as a regular guest, a man you knew well. Did he ever confide in you about his fears, his enemies, or perhaps his hopes for reconciliation with his past?" Mrs. Langley's hand stilled, and her eyes flickered with something like sorrow. "He was a private man, Monsieur Poirot, despite his jovial air. He spoke of his time in India, but only in stories, battles, hunts, that sort of thing. He never mentioned enemies, though. I sensed he carried a burden. That letter he received the morning of his death, it changed him. He was quieter, more withdrawn." Poirot nodded, his gaze steady. "And you, madame, you noticed this letter, yet you did not mention it until pressed. Why? Was it to protect the Major, or perhaps someone else?" Mrs. Langley's lips parted, and for a moment she seemed on the verge of protest. Then her shoulders sagged, and she sighed. "You see too much, Monsieur Poirot. I didn't want to stir trouble. The Major, He was kind to me after my husband died. He helped me keep the inn running, lent me money when times were hard. I owed him a great deal, and I didn't want his name dragged through gossip." Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. "And did you know of Robert Thompson, or of Dr. Perry's true identity?" Mrs. Langley shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, not until you revealed it. But I suspected the Major was troubled by someone from his past. He once said, after too much brandy, that he'd been betrayed by a man he trusted, and it cost him everything."
The drink talking. Poirot's eyes softened, but his mind was racing. "And this loan, madame, the one the Major gave you, did he ever press you to repay it, as he did with Monsieur Carver?" Mrs. Langley's cheeks flushed, and she looked away. "No, he was generous, but I felt the weight of it, you know. I wanted to repay him, to prove the inn could stand on its own. That's why I kept quiet about his mood that day. I didn't want anyone thinking he was cruel or demanding." Poirot nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Merci, madame. Your loyalty, it is admirable. But the truth, it must always come first. You have helped to clear the final shadows." As they left the dining room, Hastings whispered, "Good Lord, Poirot, you don't think Mrs. Langley was hiding something sinister, do you? She seems genuinely fond of the Major." "No, Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low. "Her silence was born of gratitude, not guilt. She protected the Major's memory, as she protected this inn. But her words confirm what I suspected. The Major's past was a wound that shaped his final days, and those around him felt its echo." They stepped into the parlour, where Miss Clara Henshaw was knitting by the fire, her needles clicking rhythmically. She glanced up, her sharp eyes meeting Poirot's. "Leaving it last, Monsieur Poirot?" she said, her tone dry. "You've turned this inn upside down, but I suppose we're better for it." Poirot's smile was courteous. "Mademoiselle, the truth, it is a storm, but it clears the air. You, with your keen observation, have been most helpful." Miss Henshaw snorted softly. "I watch, I listen. People reveal themselves whether they mean to or not. You've a knack for it, too." As they gathered their coats, Hastings couldn't resist one final question. "Poirot, was there really anything left to uncover? Mrs. Langley's story, it's sad, but it doesn't change the murder." Poirot adjusted his scarf, his eyes distant. "Mon ami, every story matters. Mrs. Langley's loyalty, Carver's shame, Miss Vance's suspicions, they are not the murder, but they are part of the tapestry. To understand the crime, we must understand the lives it touched. The final shadows, they are not of guilt, but of humanity." The car waited outside, its engine humming softly. As they climbed in, Hastings glanced back at the Willoughby Inn, its lights warm against the twilight. "It's been a queer business, Poirot," he said. "But I suppose that's what makes you so good. You see the people, not just the clues." Poirot's smile was serene. "Précisément, Hastings. The clues, they are but the footprints of the heart. And Hercule Poirot? He follows them always." The car pulled away, the inn fading into the dusk, its secrets laid bare, but its story etched. The soft dawn of St. Mary's Hollow, its stone walls and ivy-clad facade, glowing faintly in the early light. The air was crisp, carrying the promise of a new day, and the village seemed to stir gently awake, as if relieved to be free of the dark shadow cast by Major Forsyth's murder. Inside, the parlor was quiet, its furnishings tidied and the fire reduced to embers, signaling the end of a tumultuous chapter. Hercule Poirot, his suitcase packed and his coat immaculate, stood by the window, his green eyes reflecting the serene landscape. Captain Hastings, securing the last of their belongings, felt a sense of finality. The Poirot's contemplative silence suggested there was one last reflection to be shared. "Poirot," Hastings said, adjusting his hat, "we're finally off. The case is solved, the inn's settling down, and I must say I'm looking forward to London's comforts. But you've got that look again. What's on your mind?" Poirot turned, his mustaches twitching with a faint smile. "Mon ami, you know me well. The case of Major Forsyth's murder, it is closed, oui. Dr. Perry, Robert Thompson, sits in custody, his guilt laid bare. The threads of Monsieur Carver's shame, Mademoiselle Vance's suspicions, Madame Langley's loyalty, they are all tied. Yet, as we depart, Hercule Poirot reflects not only on the crime, but on the nature of truth itself." Hastings raised an eyebrow, setting his suitcase by the door. "The nature of truth? You've solved the murder, Poirot, isn't that enough?" Poirot's smile deepened, tinged with a rare melancholy. "Enough, perhaps, for the law, for Inspector Japp. But for Hercule Poirot, the truth is more than the name of a killer. It is the why, the how, the ripples that spread from a single act. This inn, these people, they have shown us the fragility of human bonds, the weight of secrets carried too long." Before Hastings could respond, Miss Beatrice Langley entered, her silver hair neatly pinned, her face weary but resolute. She carried a small tray with 2 cups of tea, a gesture of farewell. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, her voice steady. "I wanted to see you off properly. The Willoughby owes you a great debt. You've given us back our peace, though it will take time to heal." Poirot bowed, his manner gracious. "Madame, the debt is mine. For you have provided a stage for the little grey cells to perform. The Willoughby Inn, it will endure, as will your strength. But tell me, before we part, is there peace in your heart now?" Langley's eyes glistened, and she set the tray down with a slight tremble. "Peace? I hope so."
Mrs. Langley left. Miss Clara Henshaw appeared, her knitting tucked under her arm, her sharp eyes softer than usual. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her tone almost grudgingly respectful, "you've a way of turning people inside out. I'll admit, I didn't expect you to unravel it all so neatly." Poirot's smile was courteous. "Mademoiselle, your observations were a great aid. The truth, it is found in the details, and you see many." Miss Henshaw snorted softly. "I see what people let slip. You see what they hide. Safe travels, Monsieur Poirot." As she departed, Hastings turned to Poirot, his curiosity unabated. "You've left quite an impression, Poirot. Even Miss Henshaw's almost fond of you. But what's this about the nature of truth? You're not saying there's more to the case, are you?" Poirot adjusted his tie, his movements precise. "No, Hastings, the case is complete. Dr. Perry's guilt, it is certain. But consider, mon ami, the lives we have touched. Monsieur Carver, he will face his shame, perhaps grow stronger for it. Mademoiselle Vance, her suspicions have taught her caution. Madame Langley, she carries the inn forward with renewed purpose. And Ellen, the maid, she has found her voice. These are the ripples of truth, the unseen effects of our work." Hastings nodded, struck by Poirot's insight. "You're right, of course. It's not just about catching the killer. It's about what happens after. I suppose that's why you're so good at this, Poirot. You see the whole picture." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Précisément, Hastings. The picture, it is made of many colors. Guilt, fear, hope, redemption. Hercule Poirot, he arranges these colors into order, and in that order, the truth shines." The car arrived, its engine a soft hum in the quiet morning. As they stepped outside, the remaining guests,
Miss Eleanor Vance, Julian Carver, and Ellen stood on the steps, offering tentative waves. Vance's expression was guarded but relieved. Carver's face showed a flicker of gratitude, and Ellen managed a shy smile, her fear finally easing. Hastings climbed into the car, glancing back at the inn. "It's a beautiful place, really," he said. "Hard to believe it held such dark secrets." Poirot settled beside him, his cane resting across his knees. "Beauty, mon ami, it often hides darkness. But it is the task of Hercule Poirot to bring light, to restore balance. The Willoughby Inn, it will heal, and we return to London, where new mysteries await." As the car rolled down the winding road, the inn faded into the morning mist, its lights a faint glow against the hills.
Always.
The car sped toward London, leaving the Willoughby Inn behind, its story complete, but its echoes lingering in the hearts of those who had uncovered its secrets.